guys. Welcome to the podcast. On today's episode, me and my friends here, I have Grey Druid, and I also have my friend John here. And we're going to talk about the Nazca mummies that was revealed in the Mexican hearing that happened on the 12th. And to just get things started, who wants to start?
Well, I know it's big news. It kind of hit the social media. Didn't really hit major news outlets because, of course, they don't want to touch this stuff. Probably because they're told not to.
Right.
It's still a giggle fest. But it made a lot of waves in the internet community, and it's very divided as far as whether it's real or not. And I think that's the whole reason why I was kind of requesting that we all be here to talk about it. And I'm glad that you two could join me so we could, share our thoughts about it.
It's great because you and me had this discussion off camera, and you and me too, Druid, that it's cool that this is for, people who've never seen them before or who are unaware. This isn't new because like over a year ago, I saw the Nazca Mummy documentary, and I noticed that it didn't really cover mainstream media like at all. It was mostly on like Gaia and those types of channels. Now that it's being brought up in the media, I don't know how the Mexican government got a hold of it, but now that it's in the media, I noticed that nobody's bringing up the documentary, and they're not really going into the tests, at least from what I saw. Maybe I missed something, but they're not going into all the kind of extensive tests that were done before even showing those mummies at all.
From what I've seen on just social media, from the big reveal, obviously, with the bodies and the mummies, right? It was pretty much like just 1 or 2 days of people saying, oh my God, aliens are here, they're real, here are the bodies. And then you had people come up and saying, okay, well, this has already been brought up, 2 years prior, and we can lay it to rest. And that's kind of where things are now.
Yeah, this kind of goes back to what you and I have discussed before. Yeah, we know that these mummies have been put out before, supposedly from Nazca. If someone watching this podcast isn't sure what the Nazca lines are, I urge them to do a search on that. They're absolutely amazing. We really can't replicate ourselves without being, having some kind of communication from someone above us to down below as far as how to map it out and such. It's old for us, but for a lot of people that are just getting into UFOlogy or getting into aliens and thinking about their actual existence, it's new to them. And so, we should always kind of treat it like it's updated. And I think that's what they were meaning to do when they brought it out for the Mexican hearing. And to a lot of fanfare. One of the people that brought it out is Jaime Maussan. And Jaime Maussan has been doing, he's had his own UFO show for, probably since I was born in Mexican media. He gets a lot of flack for, fake footage and now fake mummies. But, really, he's done a lot of good. So I just like to add that, as we're trying to disseminate this information about the mummies, whether they're false, whether they're true, whether we're unsure, at least it keeps the conversation going. And that's important.
Just to talk a little bit about some of the skepticism that's going around, I watched the documentary already, but I rewatched it just to kind of get some keynotes here that were mentioned that I just wanted to bring up. And one of the things that they brought up was you had over from the Russian, they had like the Russian scientists over in Russia, like do an analysis. And what the woman in the documentary determined was that there were remnants of what seemed like the brain or soft material in their scans towards the back of the skull. They also mentioned in Denver, they had like over in radiology, they had a doctor do another scan. And she said none of the bones appeared to be fused together. There are no suture lines or anything like that, which seems to her that it's more of a naturally occurring structure, like an organism, like us, like if a person died. Another thing was that they tried to do some carbon dating. One of the bodies is at least 1,000 years old. It's around the same for the one that they called Maria. And I'm like, okay, so if they're that old, like what kind of techniques would they use to like fake putting this all together with no suture lines whatsoever, no kind of, it doesn't seem like it was fabricated. Like, how do you fabricate, like in one of the smaller bodies that had like a bump and it had eggs with like fetus in it? I don't see how someone would make that up or create like a fake fetus like over 1,000 years ago.
I did want to talk about the really interesting similarities between the footage of these mummies and also the Russian footage of the little gray, and that was found in Siberia. Putting them together, they look very, very similar to kind of the bone structure. Shoulders, now in the Russian footage, there's some limbs and everything are kind of blown off or eaten off, usually when it comes to bodies through when it's slowly, the ice is melting away, animals will come by and eat the little bits that come out. Not saying, that footage isn't fake. I've heard that footage is like, supposedly somebody put chicken meat on there or something like
These kind of issues. I mean, it is. Sorry, Gray. Sorry. Please continue.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes down to the body, I actually do have some notes on here that I can read through of the actual research that the researchers went into. Article 11 conclusions. Based on the produced CT scan images, 3D reproduction in comparison with existing literature leads to the following conclusions. The archaeological find is an unknown form of animal, was identified to have a head composed of a llama, deteriorated brain case, and seemingly new forms show that it is made from mummified parts, unidentified animals. To this end, a new perception of the llama deteriorated brain cases gained through the CT scan by producing and studying various sections as presented in the paper. This new piece of information could have been perceived without the motivation to identify the head and bones, which is most probably an archaeological find. One can point out suspicion that Peru cultures use body part elements to express art or religious beliefs based on the importance of those llamas plays in the Peruvian cosmology. I know everyone's seen the video where they're like, debunking it. The llama like brain, and then you have pretty much a match, or the skeleton skulls are mashed together. The interesting thing about all this is, so one can assume that the finds are archaeological in nature, judging from the age and estimation of the metal implant presented in the chest, and the C14 chronological estimations performed on the mummy Victoria were assembled from recent biological material and their use of acids and methods that cannot be dated with C14. Based on the above, if one can be convinced that the findings constitute a fabrication, one can admit in the same time that the finds are constructions of very high quality and wonder how these are produced hundreds of years ago based on the C14 tests, or even today. Primitive technology and poor means available to the tomb raiders in Peru. For the ability for them to make these high quality fakes, so to speak, potentially hundreds of years ago, if not even modern, would be extremely difficult.
That's what I'm saying. For anyone watching this podcast, I just want to go out and say, because I told you this, I also told you, John, that there will always be a cop-out for anything you want to deny, like UFOs, whatever it is, ghosts, whatever. You can always, even if you see with your own eyes, if you don't want to believe something, and you could do all the tests in the world, you could have all the footage, you could have all the pictures, and you can still deny it, say it's fake, say it's this, say it's that, and it really is up to the person, because what we deem as true for us as individuals is, again, completely individual, regardless of what the mainstream media tells you, even if it's a scientist. So
I'd like to go ahead and kind of go along with what Gray was talking about. Naval surgeon's comments on the mummified bodies. His name is Jose de Jesus Zalce Benitez. It is an honor for me to present on such a high platform the results of my analysis derived from the study of the anatomy of these non-human bodies. As a forensic doctor, in collaboration with the biologist Jose de la Cruz Rios, and based on the results of various scientific evidence, such as X-rays, computed tomography, three-dimensional reconstructions, macroscopic and microscopic analysis, histology, carbon-14, forensic anthropology, comparative anatomy, and DNA analysis, so a bag full of things, which is the queen of evidence in forensic science for comparative studies. I can affirm that these bodies are not related to human beings. For this purpose, I will start with a description of the images that we will see next. So he's going through the images. They are bodies approximately 60 centimeters long, covered by a white powder that, through electron microscopy, we identify as diatom powder, which allows the desiccation of the bodies as well as the absence of the generation of bacteria, fungi, and cadaveric fauna. The presence of this dust allows the perfect conservation by desiccation of these bodies, causing a natural conservation process over time, which we were able to calculate by applying the carbon-14 test, which indicated and dated an average of 1,000 years old. This makes the place where these bodies were found, which is around Nazca Lines, an ideal place for their conservation and preservation by whoever or those who deposited them at this site in Peru. Side note, Nazca Lines, the reason why that they are so well preserved is because of the area around and how arid it is. It doesn't get a lot of rainwater and stuff like that from storms, which is, again, helped preserve it for a long time. He says, entering the topic of anatomy, we can see that they have a humanoid structure that consists of a head, trunk, abdomen, and limbs, which end in tridactyl hands and feet. The bone structure of the entire skeleton shows us perfect harmony and agreement between the joints. Some people have debated that, and I'll get on that in a second. The final part of each bone fits perfectly with the bone that follows it, and the wear of these is also observed due to the movement of the specimen's own biomechanics, being very resistant bones, but light like those of birds. I want to touch on where it says that the skeleton is showing perfect harmony between the joints. Skeptics, I'll say skeptics, and we'll say the scientists, have noted that there's things like the hands that are attached to the forearms of these aren't showing wrists at all, as an example. There's no wrist bones. They're just kind of there. The head is the element of particular interest since it is large in its proportions compared to the body. However, with spaces that allow it to be very light but rigid and resistant, with a large intracranial cavity, which evidenced that it was a container for very large brain or neurological material. Likewise, we see that the spaces in the eye orbits are very large in size, which would allow a very wide stereoscopic vision for this specimen. It has very small nostrils and an oral cavity that, due to its jaw joint and absence of teeth, allows us to determine that its nutrition was by swallowing and not by chewing. The neck, in turn, is a long structure that joins the head in the middle floor of the skull, which is a rarity that does not occur in primate species, since the union is in the posterior floor through the foramen magnum. So there's a lot of technological terms in here, but that's fine. And not in the middle, which is usually circular or ovoid in shape, being something unique since in these species it is rectangular and cubic in shape. This is consistent with the 4 or 5 cervical vertebrae, which are small in bone thickness, but have a very wide intervertebral disc, which makes it possible for this neck to be retractable like that of turtles. And people always say, it looks a lot like, Steven Spielberg, E.T. Well, even more so because they're saying the neck can extend and contract. In the thorax, we find a fork very similar to that of birds, which allows the shoulder joints to continue and have very wide mobility capabilities. In the thorax, we find that the ribs are complete and continuous, completely circular until they join with the vertebral column. Now, a lot of people are saying that its rib cage is kind of spiraled around, like it's kind of like a snake. It's not like our rib cages that we have, or any known species that's humanoid, at least, that has that. And that includes mammals. In the abdomen, we can evidence the presence of 3 eggs that we were able to show at a millimetric level that there are oviducts with the presence of millimetric eggs. This means that they were in continuous gestation process. In addition, it confirms 100% that they are biological and organic, since the process of replication or reproduction through these eggs and their development in the oviduct would be impossible to falsify. We can also observe, thanks to tomography, the traces of muscles, tendons, ligaments, and blood vessels, as well as possible organs or organelles that would have to be defined in subsequent studies, and the wear and tear of the biomechanics of the specimen, which end in tridactyl hands and feet with 5 phalanges. This would allow them not to occupy the thumb as a position, but rather use your 3 fingers in a wrapping manner to hold things. Here is one of the most outstanding and relevant peculiarities, that they do not have carpal and tarsal bones. The phalanges are direct to the bones of the arm and forearm, in addition to ending in a kind of nail bed for the nail. In that observation of microscopes, we found fingerprints. This would be impossible to replicate. These fingerprints are of particular interest since most specimens on this planet have deep or circular footprints, and the fingerprints of these specimens are completely straight and horizontally linear. So instead of the spiral, they're just going straight across. Another peculiarity is that some of these bodies have metal implants that are perfectly attached within the skin and towards the surface, making a very impressive biofunctional fusion. These implants are the alloy of various metals, among which osmium and cadmium stand out, which are currently used for satellite communications. Finally, I will point out that the DNA analysis, after having been compared with more than 1 million registered species, we found that there is a significant difference between what is known and these bodies. These studies were carried out in various high-level institutions, both national and international, and the results gave evidence that 70% of the genetic material coincides with what is known, but there is a difference of 30%. So what is the relevance of this? Well, if the human being, compared to primates, has a differentiation of less than 5%, and compared to bacteria, it has a differentiation of less than 15%, this would indicate that the difference found of more than 30% is something totally outside the parameter of what is expected, is foreign to what is described and known at this moment by human beings. In conclusion, and for all the above, we can say that these bodies are from a non-human species that has irrefutable differences with what is described in the biology and taxonomy of the Darwinian species evolution tree, without a common or traceable predecessor, or without a descent and evolution still described. I can affirm that these bodies are 100% real, organic, and biological, that at the time they had life and are irrefutable evidence in themselves. We are facing the paradigm of describing a new species, or the opportunity to accept that there has been contact with other non-human beings that were drawn and pointed out in the past in various cultures throughout the world, such as Peru, Egypt, and Mexico, and that today we can accept their existence among and with us. Thank you very much. So I'd just like to close. I'm sorry that was really long. This is the background of the gentleman that was describing all of that. He has a master's degree in forensic medicine from the Military School of Health Graduates of the Mexican Army. He has a diploma in aerospace medicine awarded by the Mexican Air Force under the Ministry of National Defense. He has a diploma in forensic anthropology. He has an aerospace medicine diploma from the Directorate General of Military Health. Currently holds the esteemed position of head of the Department of Legal and Forensic Medicine within the Mexican Navy, a role he has held since 2009. In addition to his military service, he serves as an adjunct professor at both the National School of Anthropology and History, University of London. From the sounds of it, he's not some hobo that they drug off the streets of Juarez to go and talk about this. Now, take that as you will. I mean, you're going to have people probably on the other side that are going to have just as impeccable credentials that are going to be going over their points, like Druid was talking about earlier, as far as what they found with the llama skulls and stuff like that. And just on a final note, when you're mentioning that, Gray, I didn't really ever consider that it would have been the ancient Peruvian people that would have put these together. That never entered my mind. That's the first time I've ever heard that, and that's an interesting theory.
Again, who knows what the relevance of them, if they did a practice where they were making these mummies almost of like replication, who were they replicating? Even if, like, let's say potentially this could be partly fake or doesn't necessarily make all of them, if we're going down that potential ETs or, non-human intelligences have been here for thousands, if not millions, who knows, here on Earth alongside of us, or watching over or intermixing, different things. What does that look like? Maybe they were using llama skulls that were very close in representation of non-human entities.
Well, I mean, if you look at the Nazca lines themselves, I mean, they have what they call the being, which looks like an alien that's kind of like hailing. It's got one arm down, one arm up, like it's hailing. I mean, if you look at that, it looks a lot like these mummies. And I mean, if you
And the
look at
cave paintings with the three fingers.
elongated
Yeah.
skulls, and not just in like Africa or in South
Australia.
America, but also Egypt with Akhenaten. And you
And
look at
some
all,
people claim that the those skulls are fake because of head binding rituals, but
they're
with
trying
more
to
research,
emulate.
it actually shows they're imitating
Yes.
something that they did see. And they did actually find these skulls
Mhm.
that actually are elongated but are not consistent with the methods used for head binding rituals. They're natural,
So
naturally occurring, which is
right.
very interesting.
So of course, if
And
they've been visited from somewhere else or another, we'll say entity race, for lack of better terms, comes down and interacts with them, which there's literature everywhere in ancient religions and ancient culture. Literally, you'd be hard pressed to find one that didn't have
yeah,
a mythology. By the way, people, every religion is a mythology, and I really hope I'm not offending you with that. Every religion is a mythology. It's just what's currently being believed. Okay. But you go to all of these, and every culture has something about being visited, being seeds from somewhere else out in the universe. The Dogon tribe, I mean, you don't know the Dogon tribe, won't get into it, look it up. It's mind-blowing stuff. I'm really kind of leaning towards that now, to be honest with you. If they're not the actual physical being, then they're trying to emulate, which is just the way the human race does. Especially
Right.
back then when they couldn't explain things as well as we can. It would be like a religious
I
ritual.
don't know.
It would be an honor for them to be made into that effigy.
Anyone who's ever seen or has Netflix and they go watch Ancient Apocalypse, very interesting with Graham Hancock, love the guy. He goes into our ancient history to show that we were probably more advanced than traditional history that you learn in school is teaching us, like building the pyramids and all this other stuff, because they're finding structures that they can't even replicate nor have the tools to cut into like molten rock with this kind of precision. Anything short of a laser just can't do. So they're trying to figure how did they do that. Now, traditional history will say, sticks and bows and arrows and torches, and we didn't have that stuff. But like then you also have like these mummies, which the scientist was saying that the dust that was on them, the material, the cadmium chloride, is something you would need some kind of like lab to make. I mean, unless it's some weird, like very naturally occurring thing. But he's like, that's not something you really find in nature like that, at least here.
No, and if they're using copper chisels, that's a big thing. Copper chisels and stones in order to in
And
order
chicken meat.
and yeah, and
Chicken
chicken meat. And to put on just to do their things, then and there's no way that we could even replicate those things now. Then what built them? Ooh, it wouldn't be us now, would it? Look at the Great Pyramid of Giza, and it's put together differently than the other
and
pyramids around it, which means that what
yeah,
were the Egyptians doing? Trying to emulate it.
Like people coming up and
it's
saying,
just
"Oh well, aliens are not real because you know how long it would take for them to travel across the universe using light speed." And you're like, "Bro,
Mm.
stop thinking human terms."
oh my, yeah, like aliens can't be real because I can't conceive of the solution they would use to get here.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense.
And again,
You know what I mean?
I'm going to go on this thing to where it's like, can we stop trying to compare what other civilizations in the universe, if these people even believe that you have life other than here? We've got Voyager 1, Voyager 2, out farthest that we've, to our known history, sent anything out to space. We've got rovers on Mars. We've supposedly landed on the moon. Big debate about that. We keep doing all of these things. And guess what? The Voyagers and the rovers and all that stuff is alien to where they're at. Okay? They're not from there. They're not, natively from Mars. So thus they're alien to that planet. Okay. We could be we're remote controlling them. Sure. So that's like a lot of people go, oh, that's not a UFO, that's a drone. And I think to myself, well, hell, if we have drones, just because it's a small craft doesn't mean that there has to be an alien on it. So they're going to have their drones. And if you're thinking about with little less, it's technology that's in the hands of the greedy that they won't tell us about, right? But the technology that you and I know about, if we can send that stuff out there, then what's a civilization going to do? Not even 1,000,000 years advanced from us, but just like 1,000 years. Where are we going to be 1,000 years from now? And life's just got to be the same. It's got to have oxygen. It's got to have, it's got to have water. It's got to have. Look, I mean, we have stuff that live in volcanic vents, for crying out loud, at extreme temperatures, and we're finding microbes living like all around where we would go. That there's no way that anything could be living on that ship.
Humanity is one giant cargo cult. Like during the World War, when they had a specific platoon or regiment actually out in the water and they found an island and they went there, they found people on that island who were indigenous and had no touch with modern civilization like whatsoever. And after meeting these people, started to worship the American soldiers, started to try to replicate their planes by making little idols like that. And you see it like repeated throughout history, that kind of action. So this cargo cultism, like trying to replicate, because they're so blown away by what the modern civilization can do. They think it's either magic or something, whatever their belief system supports.
Right.
And they try to indoctrinate that into their own culture, which is something we see kind of like what we were discussing earlier with the head binding.
Aspects of like miracles and angelic, looking over at all the stories I grew up and then kind of reflecting that in the aspect, possibility of non-human entities interacting with us through history. Correlations are super similar, including like orbs of light and other things like that, or revelations from heaven. And that's reflective in a lot of different artwork. You can see that all through history of people reaching out to what they don't understand, but they can feel a divine connection, that oneness feeling. Out-of-body experiences or near death, or through remote viewing or meditation, godlike connections where you feel all in one. The universe, multiple cultures will reflect those encounters and then turn that into either deities or gods, or a way that they can explain it in a language that they understand to their own people. Is this going to put a wedge into the disclosure like trajectory, or do you feel like this is an important step?
I think it's an important step. And just to add one more thing to what you were saying is that as these cultures throughout history do this, it's important to notice that these cultures are doing it in their own terminology. You have like the cultures in the East had mentioned, oh, there were flying turtles, because that they don't know what a plane is or anything else that they could compare it to. What is a person in those super religious background times call like an alien being that is made up of light? You know what I mean? What would be the closest thing to them is that an angel? You know what I mean? And they might use that kind of terminology. I honestly think this is another first step, because this came out a while ago, but now the mainstream media is starting to catch wind of it and people are starting to see. And it's just to condition people. I think this is very intentional, to slowly condition people so they don't all out say, yeah, they exist. We've been lying to you for X amount of time. Yeah. In order to admit the truth, they have to admit that they were lying, and they're not going to do that. It's like drip,
Soft disclosure,
but a little bit more. Yeah, it's soft disclosure, but it's happening more and more. And I think in some areas they're still trying to hold it back. But like I said to you earlier, Jude, off camera, it's kind of like the floodgates. Like you have a dam, and there's like little holes popping through, but now the holes are becoming like bigger leaks, and they're still trying to hold it back because there's still this fight to keep this information back from just spilling out and saying, okay, alien life exists.
Man, I mean, it's crazy times. I mean, again, I'm the eldest here, if it isn't obvious by my gray and my eyes and everything else. But I was born in '72, and we had a TV show back then. I remember growing up on it. It's called In Search Of. It had Leonard Nimoy in it. And they talked about a whole bunch of issues like Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, UFOs, aliens, that kind of stuff. So I grew up with this stuff. And, throughout time, 80s, didn't really hear too much about it. 90s, we had the X-Files, man, and it was still kind of just like X-Files was groundbreaking. I don't think they did enough as far as UFOlogy goes. But it was still kind of thought of as laughter. And you can still hear in the news media, especially the major ones, anytime somebody brings up UFOs, it's like, and they got to play the X-Files music. And they'll show David Grush crazy expressions, which is just, subliminal. Look at this guy and what he's saying. He's nuts. Don't believe in anything at all. You have people like us that, just come out with it already. And I know that when they do have full disclosure, because it will eventually happen, they're still not going to tell us everything. We're not going to have 100% transparency. Not going to happen. We're kind of at this road to where it can go either way. And so the mummies, again, whether they were faked by, 1,000 years ago by the ancient Peruvians, whether they were faked in 2017 by Joe Schmo, or whether they're 100% authentic. People are going to use it for their own agendas. I mean, we have an agenda here. Hey, let's have the truth already. We all know that, the universe is vast. We've probably been, visited. And then the other side's going to be like, no, this is all hogwash. See, you want proof that it doesn't exist. Well, here you go. And it's just like this constant battle. What it really needs to come down to, and Chris, you and I have discussed this before in another podcast, and that is this. It's about time that we just, as a species, try to put this to rest one way or the other. We need to be the voice, not the government, not the, and no disrespect to our armed services. Ryan Graves, last U.S., the Congress, UFOs, UAPs, impeccable service record, cool. I've got an impeccable service record as a citizen of the United States. So what I've experienced is real to me, and what you guys have experienced is real to you. And no one else is more important than anybody else in making sure that we get this message across. It's about time that people stop looking at the government for the damn answers and start looking for themselves. And what I mean by looking for themselves is to get together as one and do whatever it takes. I know it sounds militant, but do whatever it takes to get the damned information, or else we're going to continue to do this back and forth like a tennis match, except the game's never going to end. Short of extraterrestrials coming down and saying, here we are, bitches, enough of the argument. The U.S. government made a deal with them to disclose us, and they keep going back on it. So we've decided we're not waiting any longer. We're just going to do it ourselves, one way or the other way, because you're going to have people like us. So it's like, okay, cool. Even if you're malevolent, at least we know. And then you're going to have people on the other side that are going to be like, oh, they're demons and fallen angels. And it doesn't matter what they do for us. They're demons and fallen angels. So that's why they're not coming down. That in our free will collectively is not ready. So are we close to a disclosure? Are the floodgates opening? Yes. But the pushback has been stronger than ever as well.
And the last thing I wanted to say is just that if there was nothing to hide, why are they trying so hard to silence Grush from having a skiff to talk to the oversight committee? Why are they trying so hard? What does he know that they don't want Congress to know about? What are they trying to hide? If it's nothing, they wouldn't be trying this hard. And Greer had mentioned that because a lot of people say, oh, well, what he could know or what other people could know, it could be a threat to national security. And I highly agree with this. He says that, no, the secrecy is a threat to national security because they're hiding and they are lying. It is obvious now that they are lying. We have to do something about that. Your government, who governs you, is lying to you.
It's all connected. If there are ETs that have the government on a timetable, which I do, I think we all agree on that, some form. We also, boots on the ground, the people involved in those programs, but also the people like us that are on the outside, the public, do need to keep with pushing stuff forward and keeping a level head, obviously, but also being like, where is the disinformation happening, and then where is the legit whistleblowers or potential evidence coming out. Every piece on the board has to move forward together.
Take a poll in between the three of us, going back to these alien mummies. Final thoughts.
I'd say for me, I would probably put them in the avenue of being, my theory I would be going with would be, if these are legit, if these are actually old, then they were probably replications.
I have to say, I think they're real. Whether they're ET or not, don't know. I don't know. I wasn't there. The evidence pushing in the direction of, carbon dating, the scans, the DNA tests, the fetus and everything, whether naturally occurring or unnaturally occurring, I think they're real. I don't think they're fake, elaborate hoaxes to mess with people in the future.
They're dinosaur bones placed in the earth to confuse the righteous,
I can't wait for someone to find this 200 years from now.
Yeah, the Earth is only 3,000 years old. I mean, come on. It only took 6 days.
Come on, guys, get the program.
The seventh day the dude rested. But anyway, I try to sit back and go, can I picture these mummies being alive? Because I think we can all be in consensus, regardless of what bones are in there and hypotheses are, is that it was living material that comprises those mummies, and what it would be like. So it's kind of like that body that was found in the permafrost there in Russia. Okay, try to imagine that creature walking amongst us or in our forests or whatever. Can I see it or something close to it? Sure. Well, I mean, I believe in the raw material. And they talked about how they actually came down and walked with the Egyptian people. I'm sure that it happened in Mayan culture. I'm sure it happened in a lot of cultures, Native American cultures. I think it's pretty much worldwide. Trying to go with what Gray was saying. I think that there are effigies. I think that, because I used to study ancient civilizations and such a lot when I was younger. And I think that what they did was they tried to replicate that which they had known and experienced, and that would be another entity species not of this earth, because they do say that they have more mummies too. They said, I think it was like 12. Yeah, I think it was definitely done out of respect for those that had visited them and have maybe helped them build their culture before. Looking at the Nazca lines, which are really close to that, I think that kind of backs up that theory a little bit. And but could I see them walking around? Sure, absolutely. And I just hope that it's not used as a weapon if proven. Again, that's the laughable term. If proven that they are fake, that is not used against the UFO community and us that are actually seeking the truth on this. But I appreciate all you guys' inputs on it. I think this was really important to do.
Thanks for getting this together.
Yeah, I appreciate Druid for joining me on our first combined podcast. I love you guys like brothers.
For anyone watching, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and follow our channels. And I'll put that up on the screen here so you know where to look. And catch you guys on the other side.
All right. Take care.
Later.